If you stand in the middle of a bustling city square, surrounded by the hum of traffic, the glare of digital billboards, and thousands of strangers rushing past, it feels as though humanity is a permanent, inescapable force. Multiply that scene across every city, town, and village on Earth, and you arrive at our current global population of 8 billion people. It is a number so staggering that our minds cannot truly comprehend it. We've reshaped the landscape, dammed rivers, built towering structures of glass and steel, and spread to every habitable corner of the globe. We view our species as an unstoppable tide. But if you could trace your family tree backward through time, generation by generation, past the rise of modern nations, past the invention of agriculture, past the final ice age, you would find that this massive, roaring river of humanity narrows down to a dangerously thin stream. And about 900,000 years ago, that stream almost dried up completely. Imagine a world where every single human being alive could fit comfortably onto a few commercial airplanes. Not a city, not a town, not even a large school. Total global population, roughly 1,200 breeding individuals. This was not an isolated tribe or a single community hidden away in a valley. This was everyone. Every thinker, every hunter, every mother, every child. The absolute entirety of the human genetic future existing within a group smaller than the attendance of a neighborhood movie theater. For over 100,000 years, our ancestors lived on the razor edge of absolute extinction. They were far more in danger than the mountain gorilla is today, infinitely more vulnerable than the giant panda. If a single novel virus had swept through their territory, or if a single prolonged drought had dried up their last remaining water source, the human story would have ended right then and there. There would be no ancient civilizations, no industrial revolutions, no art, no science, and no one to tell the story. For decades, anthropologists and evolutionary biologists suspected that humanity had passed through some kind of evolutionary bottleneck, but the true severity of that crisis was hidden from us until modern genomic science unlocked the secrets written in our own blood. Geneticists looking at the variations in modern human DNA noticed a profound, baffling anomaly. Compared to almost every other primate on Earth, humans are incredibly genetically identical. Two chimpanzees living on opposite sides of a river basin in Central Africa can possess more genetic differences between them than a person living in the Arctic Circle and a person living in the Australian outback. Our genetic code looks like a document that was systematically wiped clean, stripped of its variations, and then painstakingly copied from a tiny uniform blueprint. When an international team of scientists developed an advanced algorithmic method to peer backward through time by analyzing the DNA of thousands of modern individuals, the data revealed a sudden, terrifying cliff. Around 930,000 years ago, the ancestral human population plummeted by an astonishing 98%. We went from a diverse, widespread species to an absolute rounding error on the planet. And then the most shocking detail emerged from the genetic modeling. This was not a brief passing disaster. It was not a bad decade or a brutal century caused by a volcanic eruption. That tiny population of 1,200 individuals remained frozen at that exact precarious number for 117,000 years. To comprehend that timescale, consider that all of recorded human history, from the very first clay tablets stamped in ancient Mesopotamia to the launch of deep space telescopes, spans only about 5,000 years. Our ancestors survived in that hyper-endangered state for more than 20 times the length of all human civilization combined. The cause of this near extinction lay in a planet undergoing violent, fundamental shifts. The Earth had entered a period of intense ecological instability known as the Mid-Pleistocene Transition. The rhythms of the planet's ice ages were changing, shifting from short, mild cycles to prolonged, brutally deep glaciations that lasted for up to 100,000 years at a time. In Africa, the cradle where these early humans lived, the consequence of this global cooling was catastrophic dryness. Vast swaths of lush, fertile savanna and rich woodlands rapidly transformed into arid, dust-choked deserts. The plants and tubers our ancestors relied on for sustenance withered away. The great herds of megafauna migrated across vast distances or vanished entirely, hunted to extinction by larger, more specialized predators. The environment became an absolute meat grinder, methodically dismantling the ecosystems that had supported early human life for hundreds of thousands of years. So how did 1,200 individuals manage to survive for over 1,000 centuries in a world that was actively trying to erase them? They did not possess the physical advantages of their competitors. They did not have the crushing jaws of a saber-toothed cat, the thick insulating fur of a tundra bear, or the raw speed of a gazelle. They were relatively slow, weak, hairless primates trapped in a landscape that was rapidly turning to ice and ash. The only reason they survived was because they fundamentally revolutionized how they interacted with their environment, and, more importantly, how they interacted with one another. When a population shrinks to 1,200 people, the mathematics of survival change entirely. In a thriving population of tens of thousands, the death of an individual is a tragedy, but the species moves forward unaffected. In a population of 1,200, every single life is an irreplaceable genetic asset. The loss of a single elder meant the permanent deletion of a massive percentage of the group's collective knowledge, the memory of where a hidden underground spring lay during a 10-year drought, the knowledge of which toxic roots could be made edible through boiling, or how to read the subtle tracks of a predator in the dark. The loss of even a few young adults could mean the literal termination of an entire lineage. Under this immense, unyielding pressure, early humans were forced to develop an unprecedented degree of social cohesion. This long, dark night of the soul is likely the exact period where empathy transitioned from a passive emotion into a strict, evolutionary survival mechanism. When we excavate early human sites from this era, we find a beautiful, telling pattern. The fossilized remains of individuals who had suffered catastrophic injuries, broken bones, or debilitating joint diseases, yet lived for years after their injuries occurred. This is definitive proof that someone else was carrying them. Someone else was sharing their hard-won food, protecting them from the horrors of the night, and keeping them warm when they could no longer hunt or gather. In the brutal crucible of the bottleneck, the human impulse to protect the vulnerable became hardwired into our very biology. This period of extreme isolation also demanded a revolution in communication. When cooperation is the only thin barrier between life and death, misunderstanding is a luxury that leads directly to extinction. While complex modern syntax was still far in the future, the structural foundations of human language were forged in this long-term crisis. They had to coordinate complex group hunts with absolute, silent precision, negotiate boundaries between the tiny, scattered bands of survivors without erupting into self-destructive warfare, and pass down highly intricate stone tool technologies to children who could not afford a trial-and-error learning curve. They also became the ultimate masters of tracking and resourcefulness. They learned to read the landscape with hyper-focused intensity. They monitored the deep shifts in weather, mapped the migrations of birds, and learned to exploit what biologists call microclimates, small, isolated pockets of land, such as deep river canyons or sheltered coastal caves, where the brutal climate was buffered by local geography. These tiny sanctuaries became the literal lifeboats of the human race. Scattered across a changing continent, small, tight-knit bands of humans clung to these ecological safe havens, keeping the fragile spark of humanity alive while the rest of the world froze. And then, after more than 100 centuries of existing on a knife's edge, the planet shifted once again. Around 800,000 years ago, the global climate began to stabilize. The rains returned to the African continent, and the grasslands began to expand outward from the valleys. The 1,200 survivors, whose ancestors had been tempered by generations of absolute adversity, began to step out from their geographical sanctuaries. But they were no longer the same creatures who had entered the dark. They were smarter, more cooperative, intensely adaptable, and bound together by an unbreakable social fabric. As the environmental pressures lifted, the population expanded with staggering force. They moved out of Africa, crossing land bridges into Asia and Europe, adapting seamlessly to every new ecosystem they encountered. They scaled mountain ranges, crossed arid deserts, and eventually built watercraft to navigate the open oceans. Every subsequent obstacle the planet threw at them, subsequent ice ages, volcanic supereruptions, changing landscapes, was nothing compared to the quiet, multi-generational struggle they had already conquered. Even today, as we stand at the pinnacle of global dominance, we carry the physical scar of that ancient survival story inside every cell of our bodies. Because our entire global population was built from that tiny nucleus of 1,200 individuals, we possess an incredibly narrow genetic foundation. The superficial differences we see when we look at one another, variations in skin tone, eye shape, or height, are merely recent surface-level adaptations. Beneath the surface, we are a planet of cousins, bound by a shared genetic inheritance from a single, heroic group of survivors. It is a deeply humbling realization. Every empire that has ever risen, every scientific breakthrough, every note of music, every piece of literature, and every single person you have ever loved exists only because 1,200 individuals refused to give up. They sat around small fires in a cold, hostile world, and they held on. They protected one another, shared their warmth, and passed down the fragile flame of human consciousness through the longest, darkest night our species has ever experienced. We did not inherit this planet because we were destined for dominance. We inherited it because a tiny group of ancestors, against every mathematical and ecological odd, looked into the abyss of extinction and chose to survive.